with GLI's year-long work of establishing our 5-year strategic plan as a part of GLI's board of directors, which now includes the work and accountability of this council. And it's in my dual leadership role between the strategic plan and in this work stream that my responsibility to ensure GLI's implementation of strategies that are methodical.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm sorry we've had a little bit of technical difficulty here at the beginning. In case you didn't hear the first time, I'm Sarah DeVacia Wisdom, and I'm the President and CEO of Greater Louisville, Inc. Thank you for being with us this morning for the second of 5 important conversations. Cultural and racial diversity plays a key role in economic growth. Racism has impacted our region for centuries, and it will require intentional and meaningful action to ensure prosperity for marginalized communities. The formation of GLI's Business Council to End Racism is an important first step because we're engaging in actionable conversations about racial inequity that will help us build an inclusive economy for everyone. The council is divided into 5 work streams, and today we want to focus on workforce development and workforce barriers, with a special emphasis on workplace equity. In the coming weeks, GLI will unveil our 5-year strategic plan and will outline the specific actions that we are going to be taking to support underrepresented businesses and people of color. As GLI launches these dedicated strategies and resources, presentations like today's will help inform and shape our work. To the council members joining us, I look forward to the post-event discussions we will host later with the Workforce Development and Workforce Barriers work stream. I'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsors, series supporting sponsors, Morales Group Staffing, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Tops Magazine. Our series event sponsor, the Oliver Group, and our Business Council to End Racism sponsors, Brown-Forman, Humana, and Yum Brands. Lastly, thank you to our presenting sponsor, who you will hear from shortly, Papa John's International, for making the DE&I event series possible. We value your support. Now, I would like to turn it over to our Workforce Development and Workforce Barriers workstream leader, Nikki Lanier, Senior Vice President and Senior Executive of the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, Louisville branch. Nikki?
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Today's program is all about the larger conversation on how we have to come together and work toward lasting change in this community. I've been involved with GLI's year-long work of establishing our 5-year strategic plan as a part of my role as a board on the board of directors. And that now includes the work and accountability of this council. So it's in my dual leadership role between the strategic plan and this work stream that my responsibility emerges to assure GLI's implementation of strategies that are methodical and intentional. As Sarah outlined, this is the beginning of understanding how business community can take actionable steps to eliminate racism and promote connectivity, diversity, and inclusion, which is all rooted in identifying solutions that support the entirety of our workforce. It also supports our educational initiatives, our economic initiatives, and that all affects our marginalized communities. And so these actions must focus on intentionality in order to ensure that we succeed. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for participating and your willingness to be a part of this time to put forth the work and this effort for this laudable goal. We know we cannot move fast enough, and there's a lot of work ahead. As I said before, our community must come together and work toward developing and attracting overlooked talent underutilized talent. We have to address workforce barriers that prevent upward mobility. And we have to find solutions to instill equity in the workplace. So, thank you again for attending today's program. And we're very excited to have you join us in this important work. So, up next, I'd like to introduce Victoria Russell, who is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer with Papa John's, our presenting sponsor. Victoria is going to lead us into today's presentation. After her talk, I will moderate a wonderful panel discussion on this topic. So for now, Victoria.
Thank you, Nikki. Papa John's has been on its diversity, equity, and inclusion journey for more than 2 years now. It's so important to the success of our business that we've made creating a culture of leaders who believe in diversity, inclusivity, and winning the #1 strategic priority for the company. As the fight for racial injustice continues in our communities and in our country, we aspire to create the kind of culture in our company we'd like to see in the rest of the world. And we want to create a culture we can continue to be proud of. I'd like to take a moment before I turn it back over to Nikki to thank all of those who are delivering a little more than usual.
That's right.
Today's discussion will be focused on what two of Louisville's best-known brands, KFC and Papa John's, are doing to develop their internal workforce. Accompanying me today in the discussion this morning is James Fripp, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Yum Brands, and Emma Horn, Managing Director of the KFC Foundation. I'm going to turn it back over to Nikki to moderate today's conversation.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, gang, listen, I really want this conversation to feel just like that, a conversation. I know we've got an audience with us, eager ears awaiting enlightenment, I'm sure. But this is a really critical conversation. It's important that we feel like we can be authentic and just kind of talk it up in a very genuine way. So I do have some questions I want to ask you, but just don't feel compelled to anchor yourselves only to what you've practiced in your roles. I'm really also interested in, like, to what extent can you bring in your own work experiences to kind of flavor your answers, and then we'll just see where we go from there. So again, let's just treat this like a conversation, not a presentation. So I want to start with Emma and James. So if you guys could just maybe take a couple of minutes and talk about the work of KFC Foundation, Yum Brands, and the initiatives that you have in place that are supporting your workforce, particularly your talent of color.
Great, thank you, Nikki. It was a start for this conversation. I'm excited to be a part of it. At the KFC Foundation, everything that we do is about taking care of our restaurant employees. That's the heart and soul we provide programs. And so we have 5 different programs that support frontline workers, focused around making a difference in their lives and also helping them reach their goals. And so in our Making a Difference category, we have our family fund for team members in times of crisis. If they have an unexpected death in their family, we often pay for funerals. We help cover funerals for our team members as well. And we support natural disasters. When people have that moment of crisis, we're there for them. We also launched a fun new program in 2019 called Kentucky Fried Wishes, where we got to grant wishes to 10 of our employees across the country. And these were all folks that had overcome incredible barriers, persisted and persisted, and it was a chance for us to just grant them a little bit of hope in their lives. And then to help our employees reach their goals, we provide a college scholarship, which gave away $1.2 million this spring, and 64% of that went to our employees. We help with GED attainment to make sure our employees have the opportunity to advance their education. And then also we have a program called My Change that helps focus on personal finance and financial literacy. I'll let James talk about the big picture for young.
Thank you for that, Emma. And thank you all for the invite. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And the only ad that I would just share with you all about from a broader young perspective is we actually, in addition to the things that Emma mentioned, she mentioned the GED program. We also have partnerships with colleges, and especially there's one partnership that we're really, really proud of. It's a partnership with an organization called Excelsior College. And why this is so important to us is this notion of continuing education and helping our people, even on our most frontline individuals, have the opportunity to continue their education. And what this program does is it first and foremost allows our employees to have access to a 50% discount in their tuition costs. And secondarily, what it does, and this is what we're most proud of, is it's not only available to our associates at every level, but it's also available to, that same discount is available to their family members. And really that for us is a differentiator in the context of, it's one thing to take care of our employees, which we always do and will always do. But when you start getting into the parts of their families, when you start getting into their lives and their livelihoods in a way that's going to help not only them, but going to help future generations, then those things really stick out and really make a difference in people's lives. And so we're very, very proud of that work. And as you all are probably familiar with, we've just made our $100 million commitment to equity and inclusion, to education and entrepreneurship. And so we're really doubling down on making sure that we are helping those who need it the most.
Yeah, thank you both. So it's really important that we have in place strong initiatives and programs that recognize and affirm the frailties of our employees. The fact that we are all, human beings first, and we have idiosyncrasies and needs and these vulnerabilities that often present in the workplace. And it's really good to know that there are employers who are more than tolerant of those circumstances of life, but just really embracing and supportive. So thank you for sharing what you're doing already. So Victoria, let me pivot to you. And can you just take a couple of minutes to talk about what's happening at Papa John's to either support workers and talent of color, or just give us a flavor for your DE&I world? What's happening?
Absolutely. So, as I said, we're fairly new to this journey. I think understanding the disparities and barriers that exist are key to the programs that you would implement. And so we've done a lot of work around assessing where we are in the organization. We've done several assessments to understand maturity models around D&I. And so one of the programs we've been able to launch right away is our Dough and Degrees program. And feel free to check it out at doughanddegrees.com. But the program pays up to 100% tuition for our corporate employees, and we've got a negotiated rate for our franchise employees. 70% of our participants in the program are in the restaurants, majority of which are drivers. Because we recognize that one of the fundamental barriers is education. And so that's definitely an opportunity we wanted to provide to our workforce. And so we've gotten amazing feedback so far, definitely some of the ROIs in place around our PR exposure and impressions for the brand, our ability to recruit and retain top talent to offer this attractive benefit. Some of the other work that we're doing right now, we're in the process of implementing 9 work streams around D&I. And we really believe in weaving in D&I to the DNA of the brand. So a lot of this work is cross-functional, as it should be, and I'm sure my colleagues here would agree. That, for our work streams, the focus right now are in 3 areas around compliance. So it's our policies, practices, procedures, taking a step back to evaluate where are the barriers, where's the bias that might be in some of the policies and practices. And I think for companies to really have some self-reflection is key to say, we're going to step back, we're going to acknowledge or assume positive intent, but identify the areas where we can do better. One of my favorite quotes is Maya Angelou, that you do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, you do better. And I think that's exactly where we are on this journey, is that we want to do better. So, evaluating our policies, practices, procedures is key. Another area is around awareness. Do our team members understand where we are in this journey? Why are we doing it? Do our franchisees understand why? I think it's key to D&I that you bring them along on the journey and they understand the business imperative around D&I. Why are we doing this? Offering educational opportunities. So our D&I trainings have launched around unconscious bias. We're working on a part 2 around inclusive leaders, which is key to helping people understand, why we're doing this. And then the third area we're focused on is around talent acquisition and development. We're implementing programs to understand, where does the diverse talent currently sit in our organization? Where are areas that we can recruit from, and cast a wider net around our recruitment efforts? And then within the organization, what are we doing for our existing diverse talent? Are they at the top or at the bottom of the organization? They typically sit in certain functions. And so I think it's important to really double click on where your talent is, understand the barriers that could be preventing them from moving up within the organization. We're working to establish mentorship programs to create access to those team members, to top leaders, to understand what the journey looks like and how they can get there, and create a clear path to get there. And so, as I said, we're still very new to all of this, but excited to implement these type of programs in our organization and see the excitement and impact it's having on our team members.
Yep, that's good. It's really good. And so, yeah, Victoria, I heard you mention a little bit about ROI. Let me ask, well, really all of you. Do you want to drill a little deeper on this concept of ROI? I'm curious to know what you've seen by way of return on investment when you deployed the initiatives that you've talked about thus far.
We're fairly new, and so some of the things we started to address right away is the cost of turnover, right? And that rising cost of attracting and retaining talent. It's cheaper to keep her, right? So to get the talent in, make sure they're happy, that they have opportunities to advance. And we understand some generational differences. Younger talent coming in is very values driven. And I mean, values, not values, right? They want to understand that, what they believe in, what's important to them is also important to the organization. And how do you demonstrate that? We know in the next 6 years, Gen Z will be a third of the workforce. And I think the things they're looking for in their future employers is drastically different. And I think it's important that companies continue to demonstrate that in the work that they do. So to keep and retain that top talent, to make sure they feel motivated and valued, that they can bring their full selves to work and give 100% of who they are to the job, I think is important to track those kind of that feedback from your workforce. We've implemented a pulse survey so that we can keep a tab on how our employees are feeling about the brand, the work that we're doing, the things that we're implementing, and to always seek their feedback along the way. D&I is definitely a journey and an evolution that you've just got to continue to evolve, continue to reassess. And that's something we've done even within the 2 years, is to continue to reassess our journey. Where do we stand and what more can we do to do better?
Let me yield to Emma. She's got some good things going on over there. Please, Emma, go ahead.
Thank you, James. For us, it's exactly what Victoria was saying. It's about that turnover piece and how do we keep folks with us and part of the company for as long as it's supporting them on their journey. And so we've started to think about retention in a lot of different ways. If we can get somebody to earn their college degree and stay with us for 4 or 6 years, and we'll support them along that journey, we'd love to have them stay that long. 70% of the folks that we've supported with a college scholarship are still with us a year later. And we have multiple employees who apply over and over again to our scholarship, and we get to see them throughout their journey. And so we know they're staying with the company longer and they have that stable employment. And so that's really what it comes down to for us, is how are we helping provide that stable job for as long as possible.
That's awesome.
Right. And then Nikki, what I would add is to Victoria's point, this work is it's not a nice to do. It absolutely is a business imperative. But to your point around this notion of ROI, the ROI shows up in all kinds of different ways. It shows up in the context of am I able to go to work, feel valued, and add value? And what happens when you are truly inclusive in your work environment, the ROI comes in the form of your culture. The ROI comes in the form of innovation. The ROI comes in the form of sales in this business. And in the community, the ROI comes in the context of realizing the value of our roles. The reality of it is, with the work that both Papa John's as well as Yum and KFC do, many would say that those roles aren't necessarily the most sexy roles that are out there. But the reality of it is, these are the very roles that have kept the country going in this moment. And these are the very people who are making these things happen for the country, keeping us with some amount of normality when all of our normal things are gone. And so the return on the investment is when we invest in our people and we treat them right and we value them, they show up not only in the good times, but they show up most importantly in the challenging times in all kinds of different ways. And I'll just for full transparency, this guy sitting in this seat right now started out as an hourly team member in a Taco Bell. And I worked nights. I was in the bar rush when people were drunk and all those kinds of things. I did all of that. But what the company did was it said, "I value you. You keep going, James. We will keep supporting you." And they're the reason why that support, that guidance, that coaching and mentorship, that reverse mentorship, in other words, me being mentored, but me also mentoring folks around what it is to be a person of color in this environment and how they can better support me. They stuck with me all these years. And as a result of that, I sit here in front of you today. And so the ROI, I would just tell you that I am a product of the ROI.
It's powerful. James, you may, I love that point. I was just thinking about when you said your Taco Bell stint. I might have been one of those customers I can remember very fondly. Those college post-party runs to Taco Bell to get that Nachos Del Grande saved me many a night.
Did we have to call the police on you? Okay, I'm just asking because I just want to make sure we're good.
Some of that cheap liquor. God only knows what it was. All right. So 2020 has dealt, unmeasurable blows to many of us. We've had a lot of lessons that we've had to learn this year. Lots of introspection, and organizations are eyebrow deep in these kinds of introspections. And so I think, as a result, many are amplifying their DE&I work, emphasis on the E, the equity piece. So for organizations that are kind of new to this, that, had taken some respite in believing that a diversity initiative was enough, that diversity alone will get them the kind of ROI that you all talked about. What would you say to those organizations that are just starting out and kind of putting their toe in this equity work, in this equity space? What lessons learned could you share with those organizations?
One of the lessons I think we've learned right away is, what's your foundation? So at the end of the day, who are you as an organization and what do you believe in? And for us, it's always, we've got actually a set of new core values to the brand, and it's something we can always go back to, right? So when we're in the midst of everything that's going on, it's who are we at the end of the day? And so the three key ones for me, and especially in this work, is creating a culture that everyone belongs, putting people first, and do the right thing. Do the right thing is something I've been able to lean back on often, right? So when we're in the midst of these challenging times, whether it's with sales or the culture of the organization, is asking ourselves, are we doing the right thing? Are we putting people first? Are we truly creating a culture that everyone belongs? And that's something I actually want to kind of re-emphasize. So I think for companies to be intentional about the D&I work, to be consistent, I think it's important that this is not a moment, that it's a movement, that it's something we're going to still be talking about in 2021 and 2025 and so on. It's particularly in this country as the minority becomes the majority. And we know that's, going to happen at 2045. And are you positioned for that? That's why I think D&I is so much broader than sometimes our compliance practices and HR practices, but even in how we do marketing with regard to supplier diversity. And so some of the early best practices I would give up and coming new organizations is, be intentional, be specific about what you're trying to accomplish, and do it in a way that's clear to the organization. It's important to communicate along the way the why. You can talk about what you're doing, how you're doing it, but if you miss people on the why, you will not bring them along and engage them on this journey. D&I is truly about all of us. Often I've seen instances where sometimes our white males don't feel like they're a part of the D&I journey. And so what is your organization doing to make sure they feel included? I kind of give a nod to Humana that they focus on the us of inclusion. Us is in the middle, and they highlight that this really takes all of us. To solve the problems that are occurring in the country right now, it's not a Black issue to solve. It's a humanity issue to solve. And it's going to take all of us doing the work to make that a focus. And I think it's making sure that our white colleagues are along on this journey, that they understand the why, that they're able to communicate it just like, James and I can. And that true diversity is the mix of all of us, right? That makes this work so powerful and so important. And then, also making sure you're providing action. My colleague, Rich Butler, who's going to join me on this panel today, he gave a wonderful example in a discussion we had recently. And you probably all remember the LifeLock commercials about the security monitor versus the guard, right? So the bank's being robbed, and they're like, what are you going to do about it? And the security guard is like, I'm just monitoring, you're being robbed, right? But what are you doing, right? So how does your organization take it a step further and focus on the action? What are you doing about it? First you have to, and that's the equity piece that you talked about, Nikki, is identifying the disparities. If you struggle with recruiting diverse talent, keeping diverse talent, developing diverse talent, what are you doing to tackle that? And making sure you have an intentional focus and don't do things that dilute the work, right? So again, if you communicate clearly the disparities, for example, we've launched a partnership with UNCF United Negro College Fund to provide scholarship dollars to recruit diverse talent, create internship programs to bring them into the pipeline of talent. And sometimes some may ask, well, what are you doing for non-minority students? Well, let's be honest. We are tackling a clear disparity for diverse talent, for female talent. Same thing in our franchise pipeline, our supplier pipeline, and we have unique programs to address that. And I think it's important to make sure you're communicating it clearly. As James said earlier, this is not a nice to have. I think we're beyond that. I think we're beyond the charitable aspect that people kind of sometimes think about D&I. This is not charity. We're trying to provide access to the same opportunities that everyone else has. That's what America really is about, right? Is giving all of us access to the same opportunities so that we can all pursue the American dream. And I think it's up to companies to level that playing field and provide equitable opportunities for all of your team members.
Yeah. That's awesome. The Fed, my employer, is also grappling with that same conundrum. So how do we elevate racism and equity to an economic argument and not just like a charitable one or a social justice one? So I'm glad to hear that you are grappling with that as well.
Absolutely.
James or Emma?
Emma?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's also about knowing and meeting employees where they are. And so all of our programs at the foundation have been about how do we help each individual on their journey and understanding the barriers that are keeping our employees from being their best selves. And so, we started with a college scholarship fund, and then in talking to employees, learned that we were excluding a whole segment of folks who didn't have their high school diploma. And what were we doing to help them? And so we expanded the programs that we can provide by listening to our people and telling us and letting them tell us what they needed, instead of us coming from a top-down approach to say, oh, well, we think this is going to be the best solution. And we know that we need to spend some time looking into those programs and check our utilization rates and make sure that we are supporting the team members who need those programs the most, particularly around GED, knowing that Black men are most likely to not finish high school. If we have all white females in the program, that's a problem. And that's where we're digging in to say, who are we recruiting into these programs and how are we offering support to the people who need it most? And where's our blind spot on that? What have we missed on the foundation side to not appropriately recruit the right people into the programs. And then we've also spent a lot of time listening through action for our employees. We started a financial literacy program and realized that when you say personal finance around the corporate office, that means something very different in the restaurant. And they wanted to know where the extra money was. And honestly, we were handing them a budgeting tool. And so we listened because they weren't engaged in the program. They'd sign up and then never come back in. And so now we've changed that program where we're actually helping folks build a savings account by matching their savings investments over a 6-month period. So they'll put in $240, we'll put in $260, and at the end of 6 months, they're gonna have $500. But we designed that by listening to our employees, and we would have probably never gotten there if we hadn't actually had some good hard conversations about what do we provide, and is it what's needed or not.
Nikki. Ooh, see, now you done got into it, Nikki. See, you see how you are? Okay. So I think as we talk about this word equity, I think first and foremost, we have to make sure that everybody understands the definition of equity. There's equality and then there's equity. And to Victoria's point around folks feeling like making sure everybody's in the boat with us and everybody's on the journey and everybody understands that they have value in the journey. When we talk about equality, equality is the assumption that everybody is going to be, everybody's going to have the same or get the same. When you talk about equity, equity difference is different in the context of if I'm 6'1" and I'm trying to look over the fence, I may be already able to look over that 6-foot fence. But if you're 5'7", and then if you're 5 foot, in order to get the same view I have, we're going to have something different underneath you to get us to the same level. That's what equity is. Equity is not about everybody getting the exact same. It's about people getting what they need to get what everybody else already has, or get to this notion of equality. So just helping people understand the difference between equality and equity, I think is a great start for any organization. And then at the risk of oversimplifying this whole notion of equity and inclusion, if you peel it all back, equity and inclusion is about relationships. Do I know somebody who's like me? Do I know somebody who's different than me? Do I have an authentic relationship that has led to trust with that individual? Not the science, not the numbers, which is where most companies, including ours to some degree over time, have been. People are talking about why can't we make progress on diversity and inclusion? Why can't we get better in equity and inclusion? Because people are focused on the numbers. Equity and inclusion is not about the science of the numbers, it's about the art. Authentic relationships that lead to trust. If we can oversimplify it or simplify it to the point where let's just create venues where people can get to know each other. If I get to know you, then I will mentor you. If I get to mentor you and I really get to build an authentic relationship with you and I trust you, then I will sponsor you. That's when we'll see things change. That's when we'll see the numbers change and things of that nature. So that's what I would say about that. And then finally, what do the new companies who are just starting in this journey do? Number one, understand where your culture is at today. If your culture is not one that this is where you've been, if you not have conversations around this, then you need to understand that you can't start off with saying, okay, we're going to have these conversations. We're going to talk about these things. And we're going to really get into some deep conversations because no one's going to believe you. You need to say, here, guys, we're going to start on this conversation. We're going to be transparent and say, we're not experts at this. We don't know how to do this. It's going to be bumpy. We need to give each other grace along the way. And then we need to start having those conversations. But most importantly, from a leadership perspective, we have to have our leaders. It's not comfortable for our leadership to say they don't know how to do something. But in this context, we're all trying to work through all of this. So have our leaders say and acknowledge that we don't know how to do it, and then teach our folks how to address these things. How do I ask? Is it Black or is it African American? Well, right. So how do I ask that question? Because if I'm a majority member and that question comes up, or I want to ask that question, do I just go up and hey, Nikki, are you Black? Are you we've got to help people with these questions. How do you identify? You identify as African American, Black, or something other, right? And just in your tone and how you say it, we have to teach people the basics in terms of how do you have these conversations. So if you're just getting started, that's what you do. Start with the basics: humility, vulnerability, transparency, and grace.
Nikki, one other thing I'd like to add is, and James kind of touched on this, D&I, that starts at the very top of the organization. It is, in my opinion, not the responsibility of the diverse person that may have been tapped to lead the work, to push kind of the boulder up the mountain, right? It is honestly, the true D&I officer of a company is the CEO. And when our new CEO came on board, Rob Lynch, our first strategic priority included diversity. And for me, that was very refreshing that he came in knowing that this was a key priority for the organization. These are conversations that happen at the board level. So I think it's a priority that the board is engaged. They also feel it is also a priority of the organization, and that you start to demonstrate that type of representation throughout the board, the leadership team. It's hard to be what you cannot see. And so I think making sure that representation does matter and that it literally starts at the top, and that, you help educate and, as James said, coach and develop your leadership to walk the talk, right? It's not enough to say it in words or performative measures that honestly we've seen, when things started occurring in this country around racial injustice. A lot of companies were quick to make a statement, to throw out a Black Lives Matter hashtag or make a donation. And then their internal organization is asking, so, but what are you doing, right? Do we really believe it? Are we walking the talk? And I think letting your team members hold you accountable is important. We've been very clear. We are not where we want to be, but we're not where we've been, right? And this is a journey, and you have to keep taking steps forward. James and I were discussing before the call, this is not a linear path. Sometimes you're going to take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, a few steps forward, a zig and a zag. But I think it's important that folks in this work do not get fatigued, and that they understand the importance and value of their roles in these organizations. It can be lonely and fatiguing work. And I remember, I consider James one of my mentors along the way and thankful for his encouragement. But I remember one time we were talking that, D&I is not, yes, it can be a competitive advantage for your organization. But in our conversation, this was not about pizza, it was about people. And so to be able to have those deep conversations about what's the right thing to do for people, and something for us that's been important along this journey is, we believe in better together, that, we want to share and be a part of anything that helps bring people to the table, people to come together, to do the right thing for our team members, for our communities. That's the right thing to do. And we definitely want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Hey, Nikki, and Victoria, let me give an example of what that looks like, because this is this whole notion of walk the talk. It is one thing to say it, but earlier this year, pre-COVID, so I just want to make sure we're clear, it's pre-COVID, before I give the example. But when our new CEO, David Gibbs, stepped into the role in January, he said, James, what do you need me to do? And in the context of the art, I said, I just want you to get to know our people. And he said, oh, great, what do you want to do? I said, I'll pick the restaurant. You just show up along with some of the leadership, and let's just get to know people. And he said, okay, that sounds good. What if we have it at my home? And I said, did you ask your wife? and he said, I'm going to do that. But he came back, he said, let's do this. And we took about 15 of our underrepresented minority leaders in the organization and went to David's home. And it was one of the best experiences that our people had. We stood in his kitchen. We stood in his family room. His wife joined us throughout the evening as well. And we didn't talk about what we did at work. We talked about who we were, where we were from. Did we have cats, dogs, birds, kids? What was on our bucket list? We talked about all those kinds of things. And this was a touch that I had nothing to do with any of this. David said, I'll take care of it. We'll set it up. When our folks pulled up to David's home, there's plenty of parking spaces up along the street and all those kinds of things. Our people could have parked anywhere and been fine. When our people pulled up at his home, David had gotten valet service for our people. They pulled up, they got out, they walked into his doorway, and their cars were taken care of. Now, that might not seem like a huge deal, but if you're an underrepresented minority and you've never been to the CEO's home and you pull up and he has gotten valet service for you, even though you could have literally walked 10 feet apart, it sends a message.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's so much richness in what you shared, all of you. And I think what I'm particularly struck, well, I'm struck by so much of it, but I think this issue of defining equity is really the core of it. Because I think a lot of organizations um, are somewhat burdened by and maybe even shackled by cultures of fairness and sameness, which are antithetical, really, to equity. So we have to think about how does that in organizational cultures that have, the bread and their bread has been buttered by this concept of equality and fair and same. Now these concepts of equity are incredibly disruptive and uncomfortable. But I think that's where the work is pivoted to. And so I appreciate all of the examples that you all have given about how that demonstrates, how that plays out. So I do have one more question, but I also see that we're at time. So I want to pause here and just see if we have any questions. I think I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to facilitate Q&A if we've gotten any questions in. And if not, then we'll just keep going with the questions I have.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you to our panelists. This has been a very inspiring conversation so far. We have gotten a couple of audience questions, so I'll go ahead and pose a couple of those. One of the questions relates to how you are supporting marginalized customers and how your companies are really interacting with your customers, and how are you supporting those customers? So can each of you share your thoughts on that and what your companies are doing?
Sure. We actually have a very recent example. I think making sure, like I said before, representation is important, that people see themselves represented in your creative. They want to know that you want them as a customer and that it's important. And so when the summer began and we were headed into Pride Month and the social unrest began, our LGBTQ ERG asked, should we pause Pride Month? Should we not, doesn't feel right to have a celebration in the midst of, all that's going on. And we had some good conversation, honestly, around how Pride began. It too began in a protest. And so some of that conversation was really important to have, and we decided to pause and pivot. We decided to raise the Philly version of the Pride flag on our campus. We had a previous Papa John's Pride flag that we were going to raise, but we decided to pivot to show solidarity with the Black and Brown communities. So the Philly Pride flag has the Black and brown stripes added to it. That was a moment of showing, kind of demonstrating who we are. We launched a Courageous Conversation series around intersectionality. And Demetria Mouse McDonald's is someone, we've invited back to campus several times to talk about her table of diversity. If you've not seen it, definitely check that out at Decide Diversity. But there's a table of diversity that shows all of the dimensions around D&I. Often people get caught up in race and gender, because I think those are the visible, most kind of discussed topics around D&I. But there's so many other dimensions of diversity. The table even includes, your DISC profile, right? And it leads people into a conversation, not just about what makes you different, but where you have commonalities, where you can have shared interests. And as James said, pursue that art of diversity to build authentic relationships. And that's important. And so then we brought our, not just our African-American ERG and our Pride LGBTQ ERG, but all of our employee resource groups, we've got 8 now, to a conversation with our marketing leaders to talk about, how should the brand position during this time, making sure that we're culturally aware and culturally sensitive to the climate that we're in. I've often said in my role, I don't have to be the expert on every area. That's why you bring your diverse talent to the table, give them a seat at the table, ask for their thoughts, their comments, how they feel, and weave that into the work that you do. And so I think we've seen a very real example, and that's just one of many of how we've engaged our own talent to get their thoughts about how to make sure the brand is culturally aware and sidestep many of the potential landmines that I think are out there for brands that they walk into all the time. And sometimes they ask, like, how did we get here? Or how did this company allow this to happen? And often you don't have the right people at the table. So I think as leaders, it's important that we step back and ask ourselves, like, who's not here? And then to go a step further, you might have diverse voices at the table, but if they are not elevated, if they are not listened to, if they are not kind of invited into the conversation, just physically being there is not enough. And then what do you do with what you hear? I think there's this moment of grace that James talked about, that all of us have an opportunity to challenge what we know and believe, challenge our own biases. All of us have our own biases, and understand where that plays a role in some of our decision making, the projects we pursue, initiatives we focus on, and making sure that all of our customers feel valued. I think at some point, there won't be multicultural marketing. Like right now, we've actually worked with Nimbus, which is our multicultural agency of record, have been instrumental in some of making sure our work is inclusive. But at some point, the country is just going to be diverse, right? And so I think it's important to make sure your organization is prepared for that. And I hate to use brands as an example, but at some point, you need to know who your consumer base is. You can be Walmart and know the values of your consumers. You can be Target and lean that direction. But if you can't make up your mind and know who you are, you might end up as Kmart, right? Lost somewhere in the middle. And so I think if, all of us understanding green, right, and diversity and driving sales, and understanding your consumers is critical to doing that, knowing their values, what appeals to them, what doesn't, and making sure they feel representative in the work that you do.
Emma and James, what about you at Yum Brands? How are you supporting your customers?
I'll let you take this one. Since we're so focused at the foundation on our team members, it's a little bit different perspective. So James, you're the expert here.
All right, great. So we support our customers in a number of different ways. First and foremost, we have especially our marginalized customers, we have a program called Harvest. And the Harvest is where, there's food that is left over in our restaurant. It's not bad stretch. We closed and all those kinds of things. We will collect that food. And this is across our brands across the country. We'll collect that food and make sure it gets to places and spaces where folks who may not be able to purchase our product can still have our product and enjoy our product. So that's one of the ways that we do. You all familiar there with in Louisville with our Dare to Care, with the Dare to Care program, things of that nature. So we're obviously involved in that. As we've gone through all the time in our social unrest, all of our brands have done numerous things globally to help people who either, as people have lost their jobs, how do we continue to feed people? We're all about feeding people, whether you can purchase it or not. How do we make sure we keep people fed? That's what we do. And so up to and including not just our Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut brands, but now our fourth brand, the Habit Burger Grill out of California. They have their trucks. They're primarily a dine-in. We all know what happened with dine-in during this time. But what Habit Burger Grill team did is they jumped in their trucks and started taking their trucks to places and spaces where they can still help feed people who need to be fed. Our KFC business right there in Louisville has done great things in the West End. Has done a lot of work there, especially during this time with giving away meals and giving away food. We're gonna help our marginalized customers. We don't care. It's going to happen. That's just who we are. That's just what we do. Habit Burger Grill, Dare to Care, just all those programs. And then when you go to one of our biggest partners across the enterprise, and quite honestly, we've been working with the Boys and Girls Club over a period of years. But when we, as an organization, we're really going through these times, we have a CEO called Chat with David. David's our CEO, really creative. But on those calls, you can talk about anything under the sun. But we talked about, guys, if we need to help people these days. We need to help organizations. Who is it that you all want us to help? And our RGM said, can you please help the Boys and Girls Club? And so again, and in a lot of cases, potentially marginalized or underrepresented minorities are in these clubs. And we've said, okay, great, RGMs, that's where you want us to put our time, energy, and effort, and that's what we're doing. So just doing a ton of things to make sure that people stay whole in this moment. We'll continue, obviously, to employ people, which has been huge for us. And it's not enough to just give folks food in the context of who can purchase our food, but how do we keep people employed? And that's been huge for us. So those are some of the things that we've done. But we're going to feed people whether you can pay for it or not. That's just who we are.
Excellent strategies. Thank you for sharing both of those, Victoria and James. Can we go back to some of the mentorship that we talked about earlier? We talked about how the CEO is really the chief diversity officer. What sort of mentorship programs are in place at your companies that are kind of like leadership from the top down? We also talked about the reverse mentoring, and that's important, but formal mentorship. Can you describe what your companies are offering related to that?
Sure. I'm gonna go first. Okay, great. So we do have a mentorship program, and we've started with our most senior leaders. And we have a group there in Louisville, actually. Sorry, guys, I sit in Plano, so if I keep referring to Louisville, it's just because I'm here. But in Louisville, we have a group called the YCLC, the Young Corporate Leadership Council. And these are some of the top leaders in our organization. And this past year and a half, what we've said is we're gonna begin this mentorship program. We got to start with the leadership. And so this group of senior leaders was assigned underrepresented minorities that we're going to mentor over the next year. And that is indeed playing out and coming to fruition. In fact, the chief legal officer called me on Friday and said, James, okay, I'm ready for my next person, right? So and so that program is in place. But the program is, you said the mentorship / reverse mentorship, and that duo is critical, because when you say mentorship, the assumption is that said leader is going to espouse upon said mentee whatever they want to espouse upon them and try to mentor and help them grow their careers, which is great. But what's not happening in that one-way mentorship program is they're not learning about what we talked about earlier, which is, does that leader have an authentic relationship that led to trust with somebody who's different than them? In that reverse mentorship, that leader gets to learn what it's like to be that person. What are their trials and tribulations? What are the things that they need to know and learn about? From a leadership perspective, what does that leader need to do? And let me give you one quick example of why that mentor / reverse mentorship matters. In many of the cases, those mentors are majority members. And if you give feedback and coaching to an underrepresented minority based upon how you got to where you are at, that may be the exact wrong coaching that person of color, that underrepresented minority should have. Let me be more clear. If I'm a white male leader and I go into a meeting and I say, okay, great, so here's what we need to do and here's why we need to do it, and so who's going to take the lead? So, okay, if I get that feedback as a mentee and I go into my next meeting with that same approach, I'm not viewed the same way. That white male leader is viewed as assertive. I am viewed as overstepping my boundaries and getting out of line. So the very feedback that an individual will get to because of how they got to where they are may not be appropriate for an underrepresented minority, but you only get to know that if you understand what that underrepresented minority's experience is and what are some of the things that they will tell you that they've experienced. Like, I'm at the meeting, I tried to say something, nobody would let me in. But then when I finally did say, hey, look, I'm trying to make a point here, then I was viewed as somebody who was aggressive. And so there's a lot of learnings in that mentor / reverse mentorship. So that's why I almost don't want to deconstruct those. I believe they belong together.
Excellent. Thank you. How about you, Victoria?
So we've not yet established our formal mentorship program. Really agree with a lot of what James said. That's a part of our talent development work stream that we're implementing. Right now, we're understanding the needs in the organization as we develop a mentorship program, and making sure those that we would tap to be mentors understand their role. We're working to develop some programs around allyship, what that means and what that looks like, really to get at what James talked about around the art of D&I and building that authentic relationship. I think it's important. We've done a lot of time to kind of think and work through what are the potential barriers and obstacles to ensure that the program is successful. Often, if you just assign people, hey, this is your mentee, you're probably not going to get the best, out of that relationship. It's hard to have empathy for what you do not have proximity to. And so I think taking some time to help educate our non-diverse leaders with our diverse talent that's in the organization is critical, that they understand the value that they have and the role that they play in developing that, and even walking them through what they have in common, right? To build that common interest that they can say, hey, I do see myself in you, or I can see where I can help you along this journey. And that really honestly starts with getting to know someone. It's hard to mentor someone that you have nothing in common with, you don't know where to begin. And we want to set our mentors up for success, just like our mentees.
Which is back to why you should not decouple the reverse mentorship, because that's the relationship building part of this journey.
And then interestingly, where we can step in too on that piece is how do we take that lesson learned and bring it into the restaurants? And so what can we be doing so that more people like James, who came up through a restaurant, know they have a path into a corporate job, whether it's within KFC corporate or their franchise organization. And so we're digging deep on how do we help develop those mentoring opportunities that help with that career pathway for folks.
Thank you both for that answer. And thank you for this very interesting panel. We are coming close on our time today here. We did get a lot more questions, so we may have to do another conversation on this very topic because there is such interest in it. So thank you to Nikki for moderating this morning's discussion. And thank you again to all of our sponsors, Papa John's International, Brown-Forman, Humana, Young Brands, the Oliver Group, the Morales Group Staffing, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Tops Magazine. This is important work, and GLI is all in on making significant strides to address our equity issues and supporting our minority businesses and talent. Our next conversation on racial inequity in business will focus on education and will be held on September 17th from 1 to 2. Please go to www.greaterlouisville.com for more information on our speaker for the program. Also, if you are a member of the Business Council to End Racism Workforce Workstream, please enjoy this 15-minute break. It's hard to get a 15-minute break on Zoom these days, but please enjoy that break and then enjoy our post-event discussion, which will begin at 10:15, utilizing the Zoom registration information that you were sent. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again virtually soon. Have a wonderful day.